Hello, it's Saturday Night Live. With our friend Swami Rama and lectures on yoga. There it is, yoga.
Yoga?
Yoga.
Yoga?
Yoga.
Yoga?
Yoga.
Soy yoga?
Huh? What?
Yoga?
What? I didn't hear you.
You said yogurt, so I said soy yoga?
Soy yoga?
No.
I don't get that.
It's an attempt at being funny.
Soy as in
Yogurt.
oh.
Bad humor.
That it's just a little over my head. The humor, everybody, we said yoga. Yeah, it was push the laugh button, and Joe sitting over there says yogurt or yoga or something like that, and Raj sitting over there said, "Oh, soy yogurt." You see, it's made out of soy milk, not cow milk. Soy yogurt. All righty. Okay, here we are. This is Saturday Night Live humor. And Rojo is over there on the floor. I got a real crowd sitting here with me tonight.
That's right. The pressure is on.
The pressure is on. And there's Violet Terria. Hello, all. Hi, Scott. Do I hear Joe? Yes, but you H-E-A-R, Joe. You don't H-E-R-E, Joe. If so, hi, Joe. Scott says hi, Joe. Rojo, Scott says hi. Now this thing here, I don't know how to turn this won't let me do an external, video webcam, but I can turn this and maybe you can get some look at them over there. Wave.
The usual stuff.
The usual wave. See, I can't see it, but I presume that's lined up well enough. Yeah, doing the. Okay. Let me plug this back in. Anyway, this is lectures on yoga. I have a live audience. Terry says, great, you have a really live audience. Three of them. It's not uncommon to have one or two, but three doesn't happen very often. Okay. Well, Scott says he's hearing, H-E-A-R, Joe. But I think the hi is still an H-I. Don't. Anyway, so lectures on yoga. The chapter this time is on the Yamas and the Niyamas. And of course, this text is going on traditional yoga of Raja Yoga. And so the chapters are on the 8 rungs, also known as traditional Ashtanga Yoga, not the modern Ashtanga Yoga that is physical postures. I'll be nice and keep my mouth quiet there. Yamas and Niyamas, the first 2 of the 8 rungs of yoga. The mind and body interact to a greater extent than is normally imagined. My computer went bing and I don't know why. In fact, modern scientific findings are beginning to indicate that most diseases are physical manifestations of mental and emotional disturbances. In other words, physical health is dependent on mental well-being, and it is therefore necessary to cultivate mental attitudes which ensure a steady and tranquil mind before one turns his attention to physical well-being. That is why the rungs of asana and pranayama are preceded by yama and niyama. If the mind is subject to unsettling emotions, the resulting bodily disturbances cannot be combated by any of the known asanas.
Wow.
Wow, huh? The value of asanas and pranayama is therefore limited unless they are taught in conjunction with the yamas and niyamas, the moral code or 10 commitments of Raja Yoga. The yamas are the 5 restraints which regulate one's relationship with other beings. They are ahimsa or nonviolence, satya or truthfulness, asteya or non-stealing, brahmacharya or abstinence from sensual indulgence, and aparigraha or non-possessiveness. Ahimsa, there's Roseanne.
It's funny.
Hi, Roseanne. And since you weren't here to hear it, I'm also here with Joe and Raj and Rojo.
Hi, Roz.
That was Raj saying hello. Joe and Rojo are ignoring you, Roseanne. They're not saying hello.
Hi.
That's Joe. Joe is waving too when he says hi, and Rojo said hi. Anyway. So here we are. Ahimsa literally means non-hurting or non-violence. One normally thinks of violence only in terms of the physical, and most people in civilized societies refrain from gross acts of physical violence. Ahimsa, however, refers to non-violence in thought and word, as well as in deed. Roseanne says hi, Joe and Rojo. She goes by Ro. You go by Ro, Roseanne. She goes by Rojo. So there's a difference between a Ro and a Rojo.
Some people might misinterpret it.
Yeah, but she is the Rojo.
And when Santa comes, it could be the ho ho ho.
When Santa comes, it can be the ho ho.
Rojo.
That would be the Rojo ho. Rojo ho 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 ho. Rojo, oh boy. This is Saturday night. Saturday Night Live humor from the ashram.
Yeah.
Now we need a drum and a guitar.
Violence in speech, we have them all. We have drums and we have guitars. Violence in speech or in action is almost always preceded by violent thoughts. And violent thoughts have serious repercussions on the mind and the body, on our own mind and body. They should be avoided, if only for this reason. On the positive side, careful cultivation of ahimsa leads to a spontaneous, all-encompassing love. The non-harming leads to love. Often ahimsa gets translated as love, but that's not what the yama is. The yama is not prem or love. The yama is ahimsa, non-harming. So first and foremost, it cultivates no harming. It may not be violence, but the tendency of mind to internally push against another person. Notice what often happens, unfortunately, in close relationships, such as within families or coworkers, where you have an inner attitude that's negative about the other person, and mentally we're pushing against that person. We're not going to punch him in the nose or hit him with a stick or something bad like that. And we say, oh no, I got this nonviolence thing down because I'm a nonviolent person. But internally, we mentally can be pushing against another person, and that actually is himsa. And the effect of that is internal. It has serious repercussions on mind and body, Swamiji says.
So we're listening to Swamiji Yoga Sutra lectures.
Yes, we were listening to Swami Rama earlier.
And he was saying by not doing something, you're doing something.
By not doing something, you're doing something. Yeah. By virtue of doing non-harming, we are in effect loving, but it's not literally cultivating love. If you have a person in your life, if Raj is sitting there feeling irritated at Joe over there because Joe's just being Joe.
Happens often.
Huh?
happens often.
Happens often. Yeah, it's easy to happen. And so if Raj is sitting there internally saying, I love Joe, that jerk, he's driving me crazy. I love Joe. Not much happens. But if he internally, mentally refrains from doing that internally in relation to Joe, then the removal of that negative obstacle in there can open the door to the feeling of love. It's not lying to yourself that you love another person when you're feeling really grumpy. It's non-harming. The non-harming opens the door. On the positive side, careful cultivation of ahimsa leads to spontaneous, all-encompassing love. One begins to see the unity in all creation and thus progresses towards the goal of self-realization. Satya, or truthfulness, is an essential part of all codes of morality in all societies. One should be truthful to oneself and to others in thought, word, and deed. As most people know, one lie inevitably leads to another, and soon deception becomes second nature and leads to a fearful and scheming mind. It is said that if one makes truth the central focus of his life, all of his utterances will come true, for such a one is incapable of untruth. Asteya, or non-stealing, includes refraining from misappropriation, accepting bribes, and the like. The desire for what another owns can be very strong, for the mind, when possessed by it, is capable of little else. Such an attitude of mind is based on underlying feelings of inadequacy and jealousy, a sense of having been cheated, and a desire for retribution. One is haunted by the thought that someone else has what I need in order to feel complete and fulfilled. But stealing an external object does not get rid of the basic sense of inadequacy. So one surreptitiously takes again and again. Still, the underlying feelings remain. Oh, this is funny. Rojo, you got it. Terry put a song in here.
Oh.
Roho-ho and a bottle of rum. That was kind of cute.
They don't go
Roho-ho.
together very well, huh? Roho?
Huh?
They don't go together very well.
Aw.
Bottle of rum.
Still, the underlying feelings remain. Cultivating asteya counteracts such attitudes. It helps to develop a sense of completeness and self-sufficiency and leads to freedom from the bondage of such cravings.
Free!
Yeah, free. And the asteya is not, he's talking here about the obvious level of not stealing, but also we can steal accidentally, emotionally from other people. People that we're close with in families, accidentally we can steal their time. We can steal their emotions by me being dependent on that other person to provide me mental and emotional support. And these are forms of stealing as well.
Emotional vampire.
An emotional vampire, Joe says. Wow. There's a terminology for you, isn't it? An emotional vampire. So there's a subtlety to all of these yogic principles that as we hang out with them, it may start at one gross, more external level, but it gradually gets subtler and subtler over time. Hey, preacher lady. Oh, there is Preacher Leela saying free, being free from all of that. Hey, preacher lady, says Daria. Brahmacharya literally means to walk in Brahman. This is one of the very much misunderstood principle. Brahmacharya means to walk in Brahman. One who cultivates this yama is therefore aware of Brahman alone. Such a state is possible only if the mind is free from all sensual desires. And of all sensual desires, the sexual urge is the most powerful and the most destructive. Brahmacharya is therefore often translated as abstinence from sex or celibacy. In reality, it refers to continence in either the celibate or married state, for sexual excesses lead to the dissipation of vital energy, which could instead be used to attain deeper states of consciousness. This is where it gets misunderstood. It's easy to read into this that says one should not have a sexual life. It's very, very beneficial to remember that it literally means Brahman awareness. It means to walk in Brahman. If we are cultivating an attitude of being constantly aware of the one absolute non-dual reality of consciousness, if we are attempting to do that, then our senses are not being dissipated, whether by sexuality or by taste or smell or sight or sound. All of our senses can drag us around. I think we all know this by living in the world. Different people will have different inclinations to be dragged around by the senses in different ways, and that's not useful. It's not a thing that says deprive oneself of enjoying and experiencing sensuality in the world. That's not what it says. It's saying walking in Brahman, being aware of the absolute reality. And
Regulation. Regulation.
I'm remembering, I've forgotten who the storyline goes to. I've seen it applied to a couple different people, but I think there was one of the Christian women's saints many, many years ago, 500, 600, 700 year, Mother so-and-so. I've forgotten who it was. What was it? Who was that woman that was very old like that? I'm saying that terribly. Now I don't remember. Saint, whatever her name. But the storyline goes, she was asked, what do you think of the devil? Now, I'm not saying that in the sense that there is what's Halloween? There's not a Halloween devil with horns on his head and a pitchfork and all that kind of stuff. I'm not suggesting that, but it's a nice story. As the questioner said, what do you do with the devil? How do you deal with the devil? And she responded back, she said, I don't have time to even consider the devil. I'm too busy thinking about God. I'm always aware of God. I don't have room for the devil. And it's a fun story. It captures the principle. If we are remembering always, if we are at all times cultivating this constant awareness of the absolute reality consciousness, Brahman, we see the Atman in everybody, then our senses are not nearly as prone to being drained in any way into all of the other distractions of the world. Hi, Joe.
So are you talking about the mental exercise, or you're talking about direct experience of non-dual truth? Because that's like, once you have this experience, then everything else sort of like falls.
Yeah, but in the meantime, you cultivate this attitude. Do you see the prana flowing in other living beings? Do you see life force itself in a bird when it flies by? If you do not, then start practicing. Walking in Brahman, being aware of the Atman, the center of consciousness in Joe. Be aware of the center of consciousness, the Atman that is in Raj, that is in me sitting over here. You're looking at me. Be aware that you're watching Atman, you're watching consciousness, you're watching this question mark animate outward as a person. Rojo sitting over there, you're seeing it animate out through Rojo. If you walk through Walmart, play with it and just see, I see life manifesting outward through everybody. And it's this level of practicing the walking in Brahman. Everywhere I look, I see this one humanity. I see this one reality manifesting outward. This is just one way of doing this thing of walking in Brahman. This is the principle. but it's walking with that awareness. So brahmacharya is not the place that this goes off, and he starts it with this sentence. Swami Rama starts it with the sentence that brahmacharya literally means to walk in Brahma. Then he explains it, and then talks about don't let the senses get dissipated. Where we can go off with our understanding of this word and this practice called brahmacharya is that we look at the effects and we reverse cause and effect. The restraint of the sensory involvement ends up being put first, and it's not. It's the consequence. It's the consequence of walking in Brahman. By walking in that Brahman, we are not as inclined to have cheesecake addiction. I don't know where that came from, but all of our senses that can easily drag us around. If we're walking in this kind of awareness, then our sensory attractions are less likely to drag us around. We don't reverse it and say, well, the effect is since the effect is restraint of sexual and other sensual dissipations. Let's not pull that up front and say the practice is don't have an enjoyable sex life. Don't enjoy taste and smelling and touching and hearing. Don't listen to music because that's a sensual addiction to listening. That's not it. Walking in Brahman, that's the principle. Excesses lead to dissipation of vital energy, which could instead be used to attain deeper states of consciousness. Brahmacharya should not, however, be interpreted as repression of sensual urges. Repression leads only to frustration and an abnormal state of mind. Brahmacharya means control of and freedom from all sensual cravings. The bliss that accompanies self-realization is far greater than any transient sensual pleasure, and one whose goal is self-realization would therefore overcome the obstacles of sensual cravings without any kind of suppression. It's not suppression. It's not a rule that says don't enjoy the sensual parts of being in a human body and living. Aparigraha, or non-possessiveness, has been misunderstood to mean denying oneself of all material possessions. But as is the case with each of these restraints, this practice fosters an inward attitude rather than an outward appearance. It involves not being addicted to or dependent on one's possession rather than outward denial of them. A beggar, for instance, could be more attached to his begging bowl than a king to all of his treasures. The danger lies not in having material possession, it lies in becoming attached to them or in craving more. If you think of the mantra Panchakshara, many mantras, Om Namah Shivaya is Panchakshara mantra. Many mantras contain the word and the principle Namaha, which comes from Namam, which means nothing is mine. So you have a house, you have a car, you have a spouse, you have children, you have a job, you have money, you have things in the world. The trap in there is not that I have them and I should get rid of them and live in poverty. It's not about living in poverty. But the trap is thinking this is mine and internally, mentally clinging to it. This is my family. This is my spouse, my children, my money, my job, my country, my this, my that, my the other, my. The non-possessiveness is the one that is saying, no, in fact, I actually do not and cannot really truly possess anything. It doesn't mean get rid of the car and walk. It doesn't mean live on the street without a house. It doesn't mean sell your children off into slavery. I mean, that's a ridiculous, I'm saying that playfully, but it doesn't mean get rid of. It's the possessiveness, is it not true? We all know this. The possessive, Mother Teresa, thank you, Johnny, the original Mother Teresa, not the current one. That's why I was trying to remember her name earlier. Anyway. Be free. Rosalind says psychic vampirism too earlier. I was a little late pushing the button there. I'm getting involved in this, and I'm not doing a good enough job watching the comments here. The danger lies not in having material possessions. It lies in becoming attached to them or in craving more. I have enough money to live on. I have a good, reasonable income, but I demand more. It must be more millions and more millions and more millions. This is where we get into trouble, is the idea. Niyama. The niyamas are the observances one should follow and are 5 in number. They are saucha or purity, santosh or contentment, tapas or practices that lead to perfection of body and mind and senses, svadhyaya or study that leads to the knowledge of the self, ishvara pranadhana, or surrender to the ultimate reality. Saucha involves purity, both of the body and the mind. Purity of the body is easily achieved on the grossest level, but not purity of mind. To achieve this state, one should cultivate smriti, or mindfulness, and buddhi, or discrimination. That is, one should always be aware of one's thoughts, and one should learn to discriminate between pure and impure thoughts on the basis of whether they lead to greater freedom or to greater bondage and ignorance. Sincerity and perseverance are essential in cultivating this niyama. So all of this internal mental process that we keep reviewing over and over and over again, one baseline thing that is a part of is saucha. The purifying of the body, though, does make it clean. But one of the things that we've been encountering a lot around here, that I've been encountering over the last couple of years, is that purity of the body has to do with the food that we are eating. I have discovered, for example, myself, that some of my lingering food habits that I had were very destructive to my physical body. So at my ripe old age and after a lot of sadhana, it's like still learning that saucha and purifying the body has a part of that is of continuing to refine the food that we eat. Santosh, or contentment, is a state of mind which is not dependent on one's material status. A beggar, for instance, can be as content as a king, if not more so. Doesn't mean we should all become beggars. Man's desires are insatiable, and no sooner is one fulfilled than another arises. The mind is therefore in a constant state of agitation, and tranquility is possible only through the cultivation of santosha. But contentment should not lead to a slackening of effort. Rather, effort should stem from a sense of duty and service instead of from discontent or anticipation of the fruits of one's efforts. And it doesn't note there's a difference between contentment and satisfaction. Satisfaction, we may end up thinking, well, this means that all my desires are satisfied. That's not meaning the attitude of contentment. So he uses here as the example the beggar who may have a state of contentment. What's going on in my life is good enough for my sadhana. I have enough. Somebody was telling me recently about in his professional expertise that where someone in a particular aspect of his profession or industry could have an income by going to a different country that was probably 2 or 3 times the amount of money. And he said, but I don't need it. I don't need that. I have enough. I have a good life. I have what I need, and I don't need to move to another country to do this particular thing to make more money. I have contentment. I have what I need to be able to have a good life with good friendship, good satsang, and I can do my meditation and life is pretty good, or something like that. Tapas has often been wrongly interpreted as excessive austerity and mortification of the flesh, as exemplified by hair shirts and beds of nails. Those are extreme examples. I'm going to mortify the flesh. I'm going to hit myself with sticks and, take chains or whatever things are and slap myself and drag it across my back. I'm going to hurt myself because the spiritual principles say that life is one of suffering. Spiritual life is one of suffering. So therefore, misinterpreting, I'm supposed to suffer. So I will cause myself physical pain, and somehow that is spiritual or divine or something like that, or pleases God. This is not the principle. But in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna clearly states that yoga is not for him who indulges the flesh, nor for him who tortures it. Tapas literally means that which generates heat, for heat arises in one who is full of spiritual fervor, one with a burning zeal for enlightenment. Acts which increase this spiritual fervor constitute tapas. So a simple life free from sensual indulgence, regulated fasting, chanting the name of the Lord, and serving one's fellow men all constitute tapas. Although through tapas one develops strength of body and mind, and the blaze of spiritual fervor burns brighter. And tapas, of course, means fire. Another aspect of this is you notice when you start following a path of meditation, maybe on day one, it's like, wow, this meditation is really neat. This is wonderful. I've never felt so calm in my life. A few months later, a year or a couple of years later, you're saying, this meditation is driving me absolutely crazy because now I'm trying to sit still and I'm just angry all the time, or I'm having waves of fear come up, or old memories are coming up and driving me crazy. This is just part of the journey, of the inner journey of meditation and contemplation. Stuff comes forward, and we have anger and we have fear, and it comes up from inside. And one of the important aspects of tapas, this is me adding this, is being willing. We were talking about this earlier, satsang earlier today, of riding through the emotional storm of the unconscious mind coming forward. This is simply a part of the process. So from the beginning, we gained some understanding of this principle of tapas so that we can ride through this and be okay with it. This is tapas, the willingness to do that. Svadhyaya is study leading to knowledge of the self, capital S self. This begins with intellectual pursuits, understanding the scriptures and other books of spiritual value. We're reading this book right now that is Swami Rama explaining the Yoga Sutras, the 8 rungs. So this is a part of Svadhyaya. But as we in this conversation all know, we have to take these principles, these Yamas and Niyamas, what we're reading about right now, and we must apply it to ourselves. So the Svadhyaya is not merely an intellectual study of books and texts. It's learning that information so that we can apply it to our own sadhana. That's the principle. Rational acceptance of spiritual truths leads, upon further reflection and meditation, to intuitive insights, and then to the true understanding of these truths, which is supported by study of the internal states of consciousness. Note that last part of that phrase, supported by study of the internal states of consciousness. So this Svadhyaya, this study, may involve study of Yoga Sutras, and Bhagavad Gita, and the wisdom of the Upanishads and all. It involves that study, but it's study in the context of then applying it to ourselves. And that's the real study, the study within. He calls here study of the internal states of consciousness. Only then does knowledge of the capital S self begin to dawn on the aspirant. Only then. Ishvara pranadana, or surrender to the ultimate reality, is possible only with infinite faith and dedication. This is total surrender and is achieved only through time, sincerity, and perseverance. The ego has great tenacity and resists such complete surrender, but when it is transcended, knowledge of one's true nature is attained. One could easily be overwhelmed by the immensity of the task of applying the yamas and the niyamas to one's daily life. Can be overwhelmed. The initial step might seem so difficult that one would despair of ever being able to progress further. The aspirant is not, however, asked to attain perfection in the yamas and niyamas right away. Few would be capable of this. Instead, listen to this. Instead, one should regard the yamas and niyamas as ideals towards which one works with sincerity. In the meantime, one should attempt to observe them to the fullest extent possible. Each failure should be motivation for future success, while even a small degree of success will reduce the intensity of emotional upheavals and mental distractions. Pretty clearly said, isn't it? Okay, that's the end of the yamas and niyamas. Come very, very short and sweet is Swami Rama's discussion on this.
Come back in 12 years.
Huh?
Come back in 12 years, we'll talk.
Come back in 12 years. There's stories, there's ancient stories of the student getting a lesson and then coming back in 12 years. The teacher gives him another piece and 12 years later he comes back. There's something about this 12-year cycle. And as I have looked back over many years of time, I have discovered there appears to be something to it. I've had cycles where I look back and I say, wow, it's fascinating. 12 years ago, so-and-so was going on, and here I am now, and life is very different than it was 12 years ago. I'm not saying that to, say that it's absolutely true, but there's something to this cycling process. Mm-hmm. I think we all know this. We all observe it. We have cycles of hours and days and weeks and months and years and decades, and who knows where the 12 years comes from, but there seems to be something to it. Anyway, the next section that we'll go through, I'm going to be probably a little bit brief with it because the original book, when this was originally put together off of the original lecture series that Swami Rama did, this book had been published. I knew there was something about it that was sort of off in a way, and somebody put me on to the original publication of this book. We have one copy of it somewhere in the library here, that once I heard about this, somebody gave me a photocopy version of it he had. And then I found one somewhere online in a remote place and bought one of the original printings of this book. And so I could compare the original book to the newer book, which is this one.
I have an original copy as well. It's thicker, right?
It's thinner.
Yeah.
Does it look like this?
No.
It's one with a simple white cover and red ink, as I remember.
It wouldn't have the.
Well, I'm not trying to look for it right now. It's somewhere. But anyway, the publisher added a lot to it.
Never mind. I was thinking of this.
Yeah, no.
They embellished it.
Embellished, that's a good word. Thank you, Joe. They embellished it and they added a lot of practices. This is not, my comment here is not it's not in opposition, but there's the headstand. And there's a big, long description about how you do the headstand. And so I'm not going to read through all of this stuff on the headstand. Now, this is not in opposition to doing the headstand, although there are many people now that are saying that I have certainly, you can tell me if you've run into truth of this, that a lot of chiropractors in the U.S. love people doing these kind of difficult asanas because it brings them patience, because a lot of people are hurting themselves. So there's a New York Times journalist named William Broad. He wrote a book called Science, Yoga, and Science of Yoga or something.
Body.
Huh?
Yoga Body.
Yoga Body. He published this in the last few years. And it's basically a book on how people are destroying their bodies by pushing them too hard with postural yoga. Now, the thing that Mr. Broad is off on is he does not understand the true nature of yoga. That's a whole different subject, but he has investigated this a lot, and there are a lot of people hurting themselves with doing too much physical task that they're not prepared to do. You've seen it, Joe, right? Some. Well, there's a lot of people in the cities, like this is what Broad has interviewed people. Anyway, that was not the asana that Swami Rama originally was describing. So when we do this, I'm going to selectively look through what part of what Patanjali is really saying about asana. It's a very important part of the 8 rungs, but a lot of this I'm just going to skip when we go through this next time. Huh?
You go to Yoga Sutras.
Yeah, because the Ashtanga Yoga, the true Ashtanga Yoga, is the 8 rungs of Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And this book, if you look at it, it's got many, many, many pages of what Joe called embellishing this. So
sanitized and embellished.
It was sanitized and embellished. And so it's just page after page after page. I mean, you know, there, if you can see, there is the section on asana. Just look at the thickness of it in the book. The Yamas and Niyamas are much more important in this process. And there's the asana, the Yamas and Niyamas that we just went through. It is a total of 2, 4, 6 pages. And if you were to really write about the Yamas and the Niyamas, you could write 600 pages on how to live the Yamas and the Niyamas.
On each one of them.
On each one of them. It's just very lengthy. But in this modern version of the book, there's many. I'm not even going to count the pages. So I'm just giving you that comment because the next thing we have to go through is asanas. And so I will touch on that. And then the chapter after that is on pranayama from a more traditional perspective. And it's good information in there. Very good. And then is chapters on concentration, and then mind, and then on samadhi, what is meditation, dhyana, and then what is samadhi. So we're going to continue with that journey, but I just wanted to, so the cliffhanger, the teaser for the next time I do this, which I think will be on Monday, is this. What has happened with the writings? Are people adding to them? This embellishment, Rosalind, happened in the 1970s. It happened because some of the people wanted to modernize the books and make it compatible with the Western culture, and at that time, particularly the Western culture of the United States, because this is where, for whatever reason, Swami Rama chose to set up this main institution, this primary institution. The first institution that was set up like this was in Kanpur, India, and in Delhi, India. And then when he started coming to the West, he set up teaching centers. The big one was in the United States, and he set one up in UK and one in Germany and in Netherlands and in Italy and a few other places around the world. But the big one was in the United States, and this was where the printing press was and the publishing house of all these books. And so I think it's not fitting to go very far into comments on the rewriting of these books, but it is what happened. And I'm just saying I have one in the library that's the original, and it simply does not have all this stuff in here. It was added later. And that's not saying that this is bad or wrong. It's just a factual observation, and we're going to kind of gloss over it. I've gone through this together with people and gone through all these pages of the information describing these difficult postures. And for those who are inclined to do the difficult postures, that's entirely okay. I'm not complaining about it. I'm not trying to change the modern world of yoga. But what has happened historically over the last approximately 40 years has happened. It has happened. And there's no undoing it. So the rest of us, we all have to decide what we're going to do in the name of yoga. And this text that we're looking at here is rich with insight and wisdom and very practical suggestions on how to live traditional Ashtanga yoga. And that's why I wanted to go through it with you, to do that. Scott says, if a person living completely remotely in a jungle or something without any connection to the wisdom originated from India and Patanjali, would that person come to the understanding similarly aligned with that wisdom eventually on their own if they were sincerely making an effort to realize the self? I don't have an absolute answer to that, Scott, so my opinion is no better than yours or anybody else's. But my inclination is to say that in some sense this is what has already happened in humanity. That it appears to me in my exploration of cultures and traditions around the world that these principles have been discovered. There is a fellow named Saint John of the Ladder, like you climb a ladder. Saint John of the Ladder, who was of the Eastern Orthodox Christian tradition, and talks about a sequence of, I think it was something like 30 steps. That when you look at it, it's like, wow, this looks like yoga. And in that tradition, there's a text. You probably don't want to spend the money to buy copies of it, but if you're curious and you're near a really good library, like a university library that has this kind of stuff, that there's a text called the Philokalia, Philokalia, I think it is. If you want to buy it, you can get copies on Amazon. I haven't looked at that in a while, but I think that it's not cheap. And so this is an example in the Eastern Orthodox of the Christian tradition. There is some real fascinating stuff. In Judaism, what is the text that the Kabbalah? The Kabbalah seems to kind of match. The Sufis, which the mainstream Muslims and imams do not like anybody making a comparison to this, but the Sufi tradition emerged out of cultures.
According to Arena Tweedy.
Yeah, well, I know this is very controversial, but when you look at the part of the world, I'm just saying the geography. Here is a geography in planet Earth that is predominantly Muslim, and out of that geography emerged Sufism. I'm not trying to argue a debate that it came out of Islam, but many things have emerged out of the West that are not Christianity, but they emerged out of a Christian tradition. And I'm not going to argue the point with anybody. Go look at the history yourself. I'm just trying to respond in simple terms to what Scott said, that I have observed in my exploration of world history, of religions and cultures and geography. It appears to me that the core principles that are in yoga have emerged in many cultures and related to, and maybe the foundation principles of what end up being called religions. They are surely within something that has now evolved and has been called Buddhism. Now it's been Islamized. Anyway, so let's let it put to rest there. I invite everybody, do your own exploration, Scott, and come to your own conclusions. But my own exploration and my conclusions are that I see these principles all over the world of humanity. And I think eventually every culture is going to discover the same core principle. Why? Why would I say that? My simple reason is because it is totally, to me, after decades of doing this stuff and sadhana and grace of guru and all of that sort of stuff, it is virtually 100% self-evident that there's only one reality. And I don't care if you call it truth or infinity or God. I don't care what anybody calls it. But if it's true that there is only one reality, is it not sort of self-evident that eventually every culture, every country, every society is going to eventually discover this simple, obvious truth that all is one? Seems to me obvious. Anyway, so yoga. Soy yogurt. I don't know. Anyway, as a professional historian, Diana says, thank you, Diana. Nice to see you here. As a professional historian, I wholeheartedly agree. Diana that is her profession. Diana is a professional historian. She is a student, a formal academic student of history. So in some sense is far more qualified than me to comment on this, because as a historian, I'm an amateur. But I have had these questions like Scott was raising there. I have had these questions over the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years. I've had these questions come up, and I never went to get a PhD or a master's degree or anything like that. Frankly, I hated studying history in school. I just hated it because I didn't like the way most of it was being presented. But the subject of the history of this stuff, I personally, as a person, have found absolutely fascinating. So although I don't have professional credentials as a historian, I think, if I'm hearing correctly, I think I have shared with Scott, I have in common with what Scott is saying, the curiosity, the wondering about these things. So I pursued it, and I started reading history books and history of religion and all of this sort of stuff. And I have come to these conclusions in my own life experience, my own sadhana. Now, I don't claim to be a historian, so I'm not out there trying to preach the history. I'm not trying to do what they call syncretic movements, where what you are trying to do is get all of the cultures and all of the religions to fit together as one. I'm not trying to do that. My observation is simply as a yogi. That's all I am, is a yogi. I'm a monk, I'm a swami, I'm a yogi. And I am one with that absolute reality, and so is everybody else. Everybody else has been my conclusion. And from what I have observed, these kinds of discoveries have been made in many, if not most, or if not all of the human cultures. I don't think anybody can make the claim all, because nobody has the capacity to study all cultures on the planet. There's only one reality that says it all. And it appears to be that is the case, Scott. But the curiosity that you're raising, if it's an active curiosity for you, go to the closest, you're close to some big universities, go to some university libraries and look at some of the books. Make a study of it. Read the Philokalia, read the Sufi texts, read the, what was the Jewish text I just said?
Kabbalah.
The Kabbalah. Read the Kabbalah. You may not understand it thoroughly. We may not understand it thoroughly.
It's a mystical text.
It's a mystical text. Look at the mystic traditions of humanity, and decide for yourself: do you see yogic principles in those texts and in those traditions?
The question is, why does he care?
Well, that's a fair question.
It's just
we can say to Scott, well, why does he care? Which can be tantamount to saying, don't waste your time checking it out, Scott. And I'm wanting to be respectful of Scott, because the person known as Scott has a question that he's pondering. And it seems to me that it's only in integrity, it's only in satya, it's only in truthfulness from me to Scott. If I say, Scott, I understand your curiosity, because I have had the same curiosity, and several decades ago, I started pursuing that curiosity. So I'm going to sit here and now say, Scott, don't waste your time. I've already done that. Many other people have done it. And since you see there's only one reality, don't waste your time. I personally, you can tell him that, Joe, if you want. I'm not going to. I'm going to say if it's a strong curiosity that you have about that, pursue it. Don't try to follow every one of the traditions. We can't follow every one of the traditions. Every one of the traditions may share common things, and they may all be headed in the same direction. But the uniqueness of each culture and each tradition stands alone. And if he wants to try to literally follow all of the paths that he can find, that's okay too. It's a personal choice. But I think for those who are curious, it is a valid pursuit to ponder and pursue these questions, seems to me. I think it's a valid contemplation, because then we ever more draw our own conclusion. And this is, as you well know, a core principle of yoga. It's one of experience it yourself. Don't take anybody else's word for it. Don't believe it because Swami Rama says it's all one and there's different faces. Look at the way Swami Rama talks. You've watched his lectures. You've been to some of them. And over and over and over, when he's telling a story, he draws upon the traditions of the world. He draws upon the texts from these various traditions. And not to make a point and not to say, let's do comparative religion, not to do that. But it's just part of what's there. It just naturally is part of the journey and part of the search for some people, not for everybody. It has been for me. I have found it thoroughly fascinating to do that exploration. And it has helped me see that in my opinion, my observation, that there is a fundamental truth contained in many, if not most, cultures of the world. I won't get out and debate it with anybody because, frankly, I don't like fighting. I do not like fighting with anybody. But these are my conclusions, and I'm saying this like this only because Scott posed that question. And I thought it was a valid question that is worth taking a couple minutes to respond to him. And if it's of interest to anybody else, great. And thank you again, Diana, for jumping in there and mentioning being a historian. And so thank you. Anyway, we shall end there, and we'll come back tomorrow and have a satsang tomorrow morning. And as the saying goes, good Lord willing and the creek don't rise, we will be together tomorrow afternoon with Preacher Leela. And we are, that's right, we are continuing with the journey of the wisdom of the ancient sages, which is Swami Rama discussing the Mundaka Upanishad. Unless we're doing something else. But I think that's right. Anyway, okay. Have a wonderful Saturday night, what's left of it, or wherever you are in the world, or a Sunday morning if it's already Sunday morning. And have a nice meditation, most important of all. And remember that what we're looking for, is here to be found in the silence. That's where it's after the Om. Here is the Om, the A, the U, the Vaishnavar, Tejasa, Prajna, and Turiya. It's in the silence that's after the Om. Okay? So there it is. Bye-bye. Thanks for visiting and playing. Let me know sometime, Scott, if you pursue that, if you're curious.
You're going to go to the jungle?
Huh?
You're going in the jungle?
I don't know who's going to the jungle.
He said sitting in the jungle and discovering the truth.
Okay, sitting in the jungle and discovering the truth. Yeah. Yeah, sit in the jungle. If you want to go to the jungle, let me know how to go to a jungle that has Wi-Fi.